Hi, everyone. I am Sheila Cotton. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research Development here at Clemson, and I am very excited to have all of you here today at our Office of Research Development workshop on selling your science. Okay, just a quick agenda for today. I'm going to give you a very brief, like 2-minute overview of the Office of Research Development and all the great resources that are offered through ORD. And then we have a wonderful faculty panel that one of my colleagues, Jane Jacoby, is going to lead through a series of questions talking about selling your science. And then Jane, Morgan, and I will tell you a few other tips and tricks to selling your proposal. And then we'll have a few examples for you, and there'll be a few too, I think, throughout the workshop today also. And then hopefully lots of time for questions and discussion today. And we'll end it by just reminding you of some of our upcoming workshops. So unless we have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Oops. Okay, so the Office of Research Development, hopefully most of you know my wonderful colleagues that you're seeing their new and updated pictures here on the screen. Jane Jacoby, fantastic proposal developer and editor extraordinaire, who I know several of you have worked with at least. Brett Levi, who started last summer, handles the limited submissions and the R, internal funding opportunities, as well as a range of other things. And then Morgan Simpson, who joined us last summer also, who does proposal editing and development, and also helps us with all these workshops and our repository and so forth that I'll talk about a little bit later. So a wonderful team that we have in the Office of Research Development. If you haven't gotten to know them yet, I encourage you to do that very soon. All right, if you're not aware, we provide a range of different resources as you're trying to, successfully do your research here at Clemson. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what some of those resources are. Even if you've worked with us before, you may not know the full range of the services that ORD offers. So certainly proposal developing and editing is a big part of what ORD does, but we can help you find collaborators. We can help set you up with different career academies or the NIH Accelerator that we're part of through Prisma. We do a range of different workshops, and as many people have asked, yes, they're always archived on our website. So if you ever can't attend one of them and you want to go back, or you want to go review one that you've been to before, just look at the Office of Research Development website under events, and you'll see links for the different workshops that we've done. We also have a proposal repository that will be coming in just about a week and a half or so. And it'll have examples of different types of proposals. So if you're like me, it always helps me to see an example of a successful one for a particular program that I may be applying to. So be on the lookout for some news coming about that. All right, just a few other ORD services. We have what's known as TigerSphere. Some of you may not be aware of that, but if you have an idea to bring together people across at least a couple of colleges to work together, to talk about, to brainstorm, and really to think about forming collaborations, it's a great opportunity to submit just a brief little idea proposal to us, and we can help you with preparation and planning of that. The Division of Research offers some financial resources to help facilitate the workshop, and we've had 3 now that have been pretty successful. So we will have at least one more this semester. Who knows, maybe more. We can help you find external evaluators and also reviewers. We have a formal external reviewer program. Check it out on our website. It's a fantastic resource and helps to ensure that your proposal is going to be reviewed more favorably. So a lot of different things listed here, the R's, the limited submissions, et cetera, that I've talked about. Just a very brief overview of all the great work that the Office of Research Development does. So with that, the main purpose that most of you are here for today is to talk about selling your science, learn more about selling your science. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jane Jacoby, to lead from this section.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. I'd like all four of our panelists who are collectively going to answer several questions that we have posed to them in advance, so they are prepared for whatever we might throw at them, but we encourage you to ask them questions as well. Sam, Srikanth, Lior, and Rachel, would you each take about a minute or so and introduce yourselves and tell us why you're here today? Go ahead, Sam, you're first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Price. My research is in biological sciences, but a lot of my work is a lot more historical than people in my field generally do. I study sort of large-scale biodiversity patterns by working at museums. And I was invited here today because this year I got an NSF career grant. The previous year I did not, and the major changes I made were purely on how I solved my research. So that's why I'm here.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Srikanth, how about you?
Right, so hello everyone. My name is Srikanth Pilla. I'm a faculty in the Department of Automotive Engineering at Clemson. I've been at Clemson for about 9.5. This is my 10th year in the running. I'm here to share any of the experiences that I have gained or learned with so many rejections and some acceptances that have been great. So
thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Lior.
Hi, I'm Lior. I'm an assistant professor and biostatistician in the Department of Health Sciences here at Clemson. My line of research spans many fields in public health, but mostly it's about utilizing data-driven approaches to inform and improve public health policies, medical practices, and to really improve the well-beings of people and communities. I have been funded by NIH before, and just recently I found out that my NIH R01 was funded. So I'm here today to just share some of my experiences and hopefully say something that may be useful to someone here down the road.
Awesome. All right. And last but not least is Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Mayo. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Behavioral, Social, and Health Sciences. I'm also a professor of public health sciences. I've been at Clemson for a little while. I think I've been invited because of my research area in women's health. I have a history of working in women's health, primarily breast and cervical cancer interventions, but more recently, women with substance use disorder. I've written a number of proposals over the years. Most of them declined, but a few accepted. So I've got lots of examples out there.
Thank you. All right. The first question that I'm going to ask sets up kind of this fishing metaphor that people often use to describe engaging a reader, that is hooking. And I'm interested in asking our panelists, how do you hook the reviewer right away? And kind of a corollary to that is, do you have a favorite lure or bait that you're using to attract the reviewer, engage the reviewer? In using that tactic, what sort of assumptions do you make about that reader? So I think I'd like to call on Lior first to answer this. Lior, can you tell us how you hook your readers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously going to be dependent based on the research question you're trying to solve, but you want to try to state the main problem up front. A lot of times you'll see folks kind of go into the narrative and build up that background and get into their point. But if you really want to hook someone in, state the problem up front. And what that could be is something as simple as XYZ disease is the third leading cause of death in this population, or ineffective strategies for resource allocation have been estimated to affect XXX as many lives, whatever it may be. But when you start off with that, the reader already knows what the problem is. They're not going to be thinking about your argument and getting lost in the weeds. And the other thing you could do in your opening paragraph is state, if there's something that's already been done and it's been ineffective, if it's something very obvious, you can follow up with that. And then finishing off with stating like, what is it that needs to be done? It doesn't necessarily have to be the title of your proposal, but you want to try to get to the point early because you have your entire significance to talk about many of these things. So that's something we often forget, that we don't need to put everything in the specific aims page. That is the selling point. Think of it as like a slightly longer elevator pitch. So just, keep that in mind as we're writing this. And again, every proposal is going to be different, but that's what worked for me.
Okay. So Shrikant, what do you do to hook your reviewer?
I just agree with what has been said. So I definitely put what I want to do at the very beginning of the paragraph. I don't know if I can show an example in this case or only in the next question.
I bet so. When you're thinking you want to tell them right away what you're doing, then are you assuming that the reader is kind of impatient and wants to know right away what it's about?
Absolutely. So let me tell you, I mean, I've been a junior faculty now to a full professor. When I was writing, I was kind of writing an introduction and all, really not getting into what I wanted to do, because we want to write a lot. Especially Jane knows I write a lot.
I know you write a lot.
Over the years, what I learned is we have to tell the message very clear. So if you take this particular example, I was very straightforward. I would like to employ this particular approach, and I would like to do this to replace steel construction. And these are the for targeting this. These are the numbers that people have asked. And this is the cost that I'm, so these are kind of my goals. This is my 25% weight savings is one goal, $5 cost. This is another goal. So whatever your goals are, that is fine. But within we have this first paragraph, everything is said. My approach, the problem I'm going to solve, how I'm going to do it, and what are my goals and objectives. After this only, I try to write all the history, background, and everything. But this has been my key aspect that thankfully has won some really good, interesting things. So this is one kind of example from a DOE, and very similar. There's another thing with a recent success in EFRC, which is a major center that we got established at Clemson. Even over there, I put a mission statement and I kind of highlighted, but this particular mission statement tells exactly what I'm going to do, who is going to do it. In this case, because it's a multidisciplinary team, the previous one was just a single PI. So it's I, but in this one, it's we. And who are the team members, what they're going to do, how they're going to do, all of that is actually talked about in this very first two paragraphs. So please keep on all the storytelling later on. Tell exactly what you're doing upfront. That's my suggestion based on a little of experience that I have gained.
Now, I would also want to add to that, Shrikant, that usually have a slam bang graphic on that first page also embedded in that narrative to help support.
I was going to save that particular diagram thing for the second question, but you stole my thunder.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it later. So Rachel, how do you think that you're hooking the reviewer?
Well, I think that I would agree with Lior, with Shrikant as well. Stating up front what you plan to do, and then weaving that story, whatever that is, throughout your narrative, and coming back to it, because you really only have one chance up front to hook your reviewers. I'm sure many of you on this call have been reviewers, and if you on the first page are really bored with what you're reading, then your reviewers is very likely to dig into the details of the next 55 pages. So you've got that first page is just so important. In our field of public health, it's, these are often things that people can relate to. So, if your topic is on diabetes, you want to say up front that this is an important public health problem because, and this is how I'm going to address it. Like in your first or second sentence, this is what I'm proposing to do to address this issue. So, most folks can relate to that because they may know someone with diabetes. If you're in a very more technical field that, like Shrikant probably is, he, is avoiding using jargon he's trying to make it in as plain language as possible so that the reviewer can connect with, what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, I would say just in looking at Lior's and your proposals, Rachel, and comparing them to, say, Shrikant's in particular, some of the more successful people in the engineering disciplines typically start out with a statement of what the project is going to do, and then kind of backtrack to what the context and the motivation is. Whereas the ones that I looked at from you and from Lior this morning were more like, we're setting that context of the public health burden, what is the problem for the people, and then saying how you're going to address it. So, but there's kind of more of an opportunity, I think, to do that in the health disciplines too. But Sam, you want to say anything about this point? Are you hooking the reader successfully, you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to hear anything very different from me. I mean, my field is not sort of as generally applicable as engineering or public health. It is much more of a basic science. I still go very much for that clear statement of what we're doing, and sort of I think about it, how you change the world, but it can be a very small part of the world that you're focusing on. What is that main challenge and gap that we are trying to fill in our field? And I at least always start thinking about it using a thing developed about scientific storytelling, and it's how to tell a narrative. And it's called the and, but, therefore sentence. And sort of like, we know this and we know this, but we don't know this, therefore we're going to do this. And just by doing that, you can set up a strong narrative throughout.
And, but, therefore, that's kind of fun. Yeah, that's, I think we've talked about this. I know we've talked about this a lot in the Career Academy, but, if you're setting up a problem, or, here's a problem, and we could fix it if only we could do X. And lo and behold, I have the solution, which is Y. So it's that problem solution logic that's being set up that I think is really important. Always setting forth some kind of a horror story, and then yet giving the reader hope. I think it's the hope that's very important. So we're being propelled to the next slide. Thank you, Sheila. We're going to talk next about how you might revise your first draft if you find out through the reviewer's comments that you didn't do a good sales job. Those comments will typically be things like, I just didn't buy that this was unique, or I don't see how this person can even be making these statements. This isn't making sense. But you may read between the lines and say, well, I just, this reviewer didn't buy what I was selling, right? The reviewer just didn't buy what you were selling. So we have some examples on the next couple slides that I'd like to get to first. Rachel, looks like you're up to talk about how you changed your first draft to the final draft, specifically to sell it better to the reader.
Well, usually for NIH proposals, you want to stick with about 3 specific aims. I didn't put the introduction kind of summary here at the top. And you can see early draft there was really way too long, and it took a lot to get to the point. You want to say in your aim page, what you plan to do. And I think, our early draft, we really started off as being very ambitious. We were going to work with these groups. We were going to do all of these wonderful things. And ultimately, we came down to, this is a mixed methods approach where we're going to establish on the right. You can see the first aim, establishing the validity of a tool that already exists out there with women with substance use disorder. And in the paragraph just prior, we had said what the problem was, in the US and in the state with substance use disorder, et cetera. Later on, we'll describe in detail what that BIMS is, what that instrument is that we plan to use. And you don't want to get into all that detail here in the specific aims. This is a high level kind of 30,000 foot view. Under that, some people choose to put a hypothesis underneath that. And so that's what we did here, was this is our first aim, and this is what we hypothesized that we'll see. And so for the next 2 aims, we did the same thing. That the second aim, we were looking at women's attitudes, and then we were comparing them with another group of women without substance use disorders.
Mhm.
And then, go ahead.
So you were very consciously applying a pattern within these 3 paragraphs for the 3 aims, with first saying what you were going to do with a strong verb, and then giving just a few little details, but really one sentence, and then the hypothesis.
Correct. Correct.
Mhm.
So, often when I start writing, and a lot of people, I think, fall into this trap too, that you think it has to be perfect the first time, it has to be within the word count. I just really throw it all on the page, and as I walk away, I come back to it. Sometimes it's just in bullet format. It's very free flowing, and then I come back and really try to tighten things up. This is something we worked on with a doctoral student for another project. But anyway, we're hopeful that this will be funded, and this is just an example of something we've worked on recently.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I liked how you made it so much more succinct and hard hitting. And when I read it, I could much more readily comprehend what was important about those. So these are some examples from Sam. Sam, can you elaborate on what happened here?
Yeah. So this is an example. It's pretty much exactly the same thing I proposed to do each time. The first time that was not funded, a lot of the reviewer comments were focused on, this seems like a fishing expedition. We're not sure what can be transformative in this approach. This is NSF, transformative as their favorite sort of word to look for. And I think that so for NSF, you get a project summary where you do an overview, intellectual merit, and broader impacts. So I just pulled out the first few sentences of each, and I actually think that this really shows how I changed the writing in this proposal. The first one that's not funded here, I've got this very wishy-washy statement of biodiversity is measured and studied at many scales, therefore we need to improve our understanding, blah, blah, blah. And then the next time around, it's like, it really is much more strong language. The concept of spatial scale dependency is ingrained within this literature, but we don't know anything about this other thing. So we've already set it up to be like, we already know this one part is important, but we know nothing about this other part. Then exactly what this project is going to do. I had a lot of comments about, well, maybe theory is better than doing this empirical thing. So I went straight up front, like, no, we need to build this empirical understanding first. And, that same theme follows on with the intellectual merit part of it. Again, very wishy-washy in that first round, the recognizing when and how patterns are predictable, enable better identification. Here, I've got a very explicit statement in the funded one. What is the gap I'm trying to fill? And I'm calling it a fundamental gap in our knowledge. Like, I am trying to tell them that this is really important. And so saying, we don't know anything about this. We're filling an important gap here. And it's going to be absolutely crucial for understanding how we can actually generalize from one scale to another. So actually saying this has an impact on the entire field. And then finally, again, with the broader impacts, just the way this is written for me, the broader impacts on the left, beyond the wide-ranging educational impacts. So I didn't even list them, whereas in this one, I actually provided a lot of explicit data on how I'm going to do that. I'm actually increasing the number of students experiencing research in my department by 50%. I'm going to have 20 other faculty participating in, and so just providing data as well as then talking about that data set. So to me, it's being much more explicit about how this project is going to improve my field and its broader impacts.
Yeah, as I recall, your reviews on the first try were pretty harsh from some of those people, and they completely flip-flopped and sang your praises on this. So
yeah, I mean, the first one was ranged. I had every single possible ranking I could, from excellent through to poor. And this other one, what they called phishing in the first one, they actually mentioned, we see this as a prime example of discovery-driven science.
Yeah.
So they saw the same thing, but now saw it as a positive, not a negative. And they even mentioned, like, some of the reviewers saw this as a negative. We don't. We see this as a positive now.
Yeah.
So I think that's all about selling.
Yeah. So in your case, would you say that what you changed was more a matter of substance than style, or vice versa? Or maybe I'm setting up a false dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely substance there, because I had just sort of initially said, we don't know how scale impacts our understanding.
Yeah.
There's some hints that there could be differences.
Yeah.
So I went in and said, actually, we have all of these potential mechanisms. So that was sort of focusing on the science, like, what are the different mechanisms that could drive differences? I didn't mention those in the first one. So that sort of provided a stronger background and sort of made it feel like it wasn't so much phishing, not exactly hypothesis testing either, but sort of had a stronger background. So I suppose that's in substance, but a lot of it was style and sort of how I sold this as discovery-driven science rather than hypothesis-driven science.
Yeah, we'll come back to this point later. Can we go to the next slide, Sheila? Okay, Shrikant, this is your chance to say what you were going to say. Tell us all, what's the key element to selling your science in a grant proposal?
Sure. So let me share some example here. Okay, I think I'll share this way. So first of all, coming up to the example that people have shown for the previous one, I just wanted to point out one quick example, and I wanted to give people a perspective. So I've been writing a lot of DOE proposals because of the way my work unfolds over there. And people have talked about NIH and NSF too. So in DOE, there's a message that I already talked about that you have to tell upfront, right? But at the same time, one thing, for example, the one on the left-hand side is a decline proposal. And where you can see that, okay, I have started working, I've started telling about everything, background, project goals, what kind of impact it does, and all those things. I mean, it's a storytelling, right? And then when I change it, the style of the same storytelling in a different way, the one on the right is what you'll see. And I'm going to now expand that. I'm going to show you. So what I did is basically a style. I'm talking about here style because substance, I mean, obviously you guys are better scientists, right, than me in your field. So I'm not going to talk about your scientific things, but what I have done is I have basically put together the key highlights of what my approach is, what my project is, in terms of what the project's unique features are. It occupies one page, which is very critical in terms of your 20-page limit or 15-page limits. But I felt like this, I was willing to take that compromise in cutting down other things, especially in accommodating this page. And you can see that everything highlighted is what my project does. And then one other key thing that I have done also here is how this particular project aligns with, for example, in this case, DOE's VTO US Dry Materials Technical Roadmap. So pretty much every organization, sub-agency, sub-programs within DOE have their own roadmaps. I'm sure even NSF, if you take the big five big ideas, right? Those are kind of the roadmaps that I was talking about. So if you can clearly elucidate, I even tell this to my own postdocs and students, don't just give a banana to eat someone because they really don't know. And don't even give them peeled banana because they really don't know whether to eat the fruit or the skin. Just peel everything, throw the skin, and just give them the fruit. So they really now know that they have to eat. So please clarify and elucidate how exactly your things align with their mission. And especially with the DOE, if you don't hit their mission properly, it will not be funded. I'm sure NSF, I've been fairly less successful in NSF compared to my DOE funding, but I'm just telling you how DOE exactly works. So you have to tell them how actually it does. People know, for example, I wrote here I'm going to hit 3-minute cycle time, less than that. But people would not relate that to their mission is less than 3 minutes. They would not relate to it. You have to tell them, guys, please relate to it. That's how much. So it's a style of working on this that really made the difference. I did not change any signs here. I clearly kept the same signs as is, but I add the style. And one other key thing in terms of how Jane and her team helps me really is, for example, if you see, this is the same exact thing. Of course, I had to read. I didn't go to this clarity of highlighting sentences and all. I didn't realize that that's how much granularity Jane wanted me to explain. But you can see how big of a message I gave in my first draft on the left-hand side. I believe it's still left for you, right, everyone? Yeah. And on the right-hand side, I kind of changed it and made a mission statement and everything. So it's kind of the same message, but I kind of put together in a much better way, right? And also Jane was pointing it out, right? Again, this is my whole message here on the picture, overall framework. When I sent this to people, including Jane, and the right-hand side picture was done by Scott, they were confused. They were asking me a bunch of questions. And I was like, man, if people here can ask questions, reviewers will ask questions. So then we have to come up with a new way of putting the same graphic. People in my field know this. It's the same message, what I put on the left and the right. It is just how I illustrated, how I organized, how I changed the style. Of course, I changed the language as well, just to talk about what people have done, like people highlighted here. But I didn't really compare for me to explain right now. But that's how I have done changes from the very first draft to the very last final draft, which has been very successful. Another key aspect I would also like to tell is when you send things for editing, let's say Jane or someone else, they ask questions, and take those questions with a lot of please accept whatever they say, because one thing is, if you cannot convince them, then it's very hard to convince someone from outside. That's how I have seen, especially if I'm not able to explain to her clearly. I take it to accept that, yes, it's tough to explain an unknown reviewer. So that's how much from a language standpoint I have also done some changes. I hope it also answers your second question, Jane.
Yeah, that's great. And I should say also that Shrikant is very responsive to my edits and suggestions, which helps us make, kind of be a good team together working on these documents. So let's see. Lior, what do you think is the key element to selling your science?
I thought the previous comments were spot on, so I'm just gonna add to that.
Okay.
A lot of times, no matter what your proposal is, but especially when you're dealing with hard science, whether it's engineering, math, statistics, it can get a little bit messy, and even the experts will have a tough time synthesizing through all of your material. And most reviewers aren't going to pay too much attention to the technical aspects as long as they're sound, especially in NIH. You don't want to make it all technical. I really love the way that figure was presented in the previous slide. It just made it so easy. You're going to read the aims, and it's not always going to be the case that it'll be 100% every aim or every section will be 100% clear to every reviewer. But as they go through your proposal, this also serves as your safety net. They can kind of fill in the holes, tie the message together. So I'm happy. It kind of as a similar example. Is it all right if I share my screen just briefly? Mm-hmm. So I have here 4 aims. One is, more focused on statistics and disease surveillance, then developing a certain series of models that will depend on aim 1, developing another series of models that will also depend on aim 1, but is tied into aim 2, and then using aims 1, 2, and 3 to ultimately develop some modeling toolkit. So the reviewer is going to have, now some people who understand the background will easily get it, but not everyone's going to be the content expert, right? So as I go through, and sorry, I need to just scroll down, and now I'm getting to my approach. So one thing I'm going to do, and I'll say this may not be the best figure, but it can at least describes the 4 different aims of how everything is integrated. And I really like the way it was explained in the previous presentation just a minute ago, because you want to get a lot of the dirt out of the way, or I think the analogy used was just get the banana peel out of the way and just give them the banana. I could go into a lot more technical detail here, but ultimately I want to give them the big picture. And if they're interested, and it's kind of just like in a paper and an appendix, they'll read through the details a little more carefully. Most people want to know the big picture. So I think the key to selling your science is to make sure that that big picture is very clear, but the details backing that up, or at least sufficient details backing that up, can be found throughout the manuscript. But you always want to give the big overview.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's see how much time I have here. All right. We're going to go on to the next point. I'm hoping that Rachel can answer what sort of techniques do you use to signify to reviewers that they need to fund your project right now?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, letting them know the significance of the problem, but also, this rationale piece, why this project should be done by you and why it should be done by you and your team now is really important. So making the case for why you and your team are uniquely positioned to do this at Clemson, and think about the reviewers are reviewing all of these other R01s or whatever at the same time. So what is it that's going to be unique about you and your team conducting this? How are you equipped to do this, and your position to do something really important that no one else is? Now, that you also kind of have to be careful here, because you want to toot your horn, but you don't want to over exaggerate. If you're a brand new investigator, you want to say, I'm a new investigator, but this is what I can contribute to the field. And you better be really sure of what is already out there, because you may have one of your reviewers who's a senior person in this field, and you also don't want to offend. So being realistic, tooting your own horn, saying how you and your team are uniquely positioned. And then capitalize on your training, your past experience, the techniques that you're using. Your preliminary results are very important, showing that you're ready to take your research to the next level.
Yeah, I was reading one of your proposals this morning, Rachel, and noticed what a great job you did with setting up the description of basically the research environment in which you're working. So it's about Clemson and about the department and about the clinic, and these kind of concentric circles of different communities in which you're working, and along the way you're also talking about yourself, your own qualifications. I thought those meshed really well. So that's a really interesting point, because a lot of people might immediately say, well, I'm going to bring up something that's that's really a trending topic, and it's something in the news that's really important. People know about it, but the positioning of the team is of equal importance. So
Agreed.
I think that's really important. Sam, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think this was sort of the most difficult question for me to answer, because I don't really do any kind of research that is contemporary. I work over millions of years. It doesn't need to be done right now. But I went back and looked through my 3 funded NSF grants and sort of looked what I did with each of those. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that I always set the scene as like the current status of my field. What are the challenges, and how is this helping us get beyond those challenges in the field? So sort of linking it to things that we need to deal with as macroevolutionary biologists. And so that to me is how I do that.
Yeah, usually I see in lots of proposals something like, people have been working on this problem for these many years, and now there's some new piece of equipment, or the computational advances, blah blah blah. There's something that's happened that makes it possible finally to address it effectively and leap ahead. So Yeah, you're right, though. Your perspective is you're playing the real long game with with your research. You're in a different context than these people are. All righty. Anything else that panelists you want to share right now before we go on to a section on tips, tricks, and best practices? I'll have reason to refer to a number of the things that you said in the next several slides.
I have one thing that I forgot to mention.
Okay.
When we were talking about sort of hooking folks, and I think you need to do that twice, because there's always that summary page or your aims page, but then like the first few paragraphs in whatever primary document, that sort of has to be a repeat of that, I think, because you can't assume they've read the one-page summary.
Right. I'm going to kind of argue that I think you hook them repeatedly, or at least you don't let them off the line for the whole rest of the document. The minute they squiggle free, then you're going to get a lower score. So, all right, Sheila, can you advance, please? So I have a few slides about how introductions function, and some proposals actually have sections that are identifiably intros. Others, the piece that maybe is setting the context or explaining the background might not come smack at the beginning of the proposal, but whatever first hits the reader's eyes, I consider the introductory passage. And what's important about this, to my mind, is that it immediately creates the connection with the audience. So you can immediately turn a reader off. You can intrigue the reader so that he or she is motivated to go on, but it happens within a few seconds. There's research that's been done on how long you've got before the reader doesn't care about all the rest that you have to say in those 15, 20 pages. It's something like 30 seconds. You have very little time to engage and to hook that reader. So I think there's certain things that first passage has to describe what you propose to do. So this links up with what all four of our speakers have been saying. You argue either explicitly or implicitly that what you propose to do has value for you, the discipline, the taxpayer, because you're getting taxpayer money, and the funding agency. So when you're talking about, for example, how what you propose to do aligns with the funding agency's needs, as Srikanth showed in his, he is fulfilling that function of the intro. Typically also in the introduction, you're mentioning main ideas or themes, threads. Sometimes it's the fancy acronym that you made up that you expect the reader to recognize and that you're going to use repeatedly. And this is a way of reinforcing that connection with the audience. You also make certain promises to the audience that you might not articulate as such, but if you say you're going to have several objectives and you mention them in a certain order, then the audience expects you to deal with them in that order later on in the document. So every time you do something like that, you implicitly make a promise and then you deliver on it. That is extremely pleasurable for a reader. Again, there are studies on this about how that's what keeps somebody reading the next word and then the 5 next words. And thousands of words later, you're still carrying that person along, giving them promises, following through on them repeatedly throughout the document. Some people have a real problem with the idea of selling, selling science like it's a commodity or something. But we just use this as a metaphor for convincing the reader. And writing any proposal is an exercise in persuasion. We've talked about the hook already. So readers decide on the basis of that intro if they're even going to read any more of it. They will decide if they're going to skip everything else except the one little piece to which they've been assigned by the program officer, or if they're going to read other ones. So your job is to make sure that you set things up so that the readers will be rewarded for giving you their passionate, critical attention, because you don't just want somebody to read it. You want to get good reviews, and by good I don't mean positive. I mean useful reviews. Like, that's really what you want to get out of this whole experience. And as those of you who have been in the Career Academy know, this can be accomplished through the rhetorical appeals, which all are used in this intro section and throughout the proposal. So I'm going to wax eloquent on these for a little bit. These come from the ancient Greeks and have been used, for centuries in order to convince people. And when I talk to people about how they're selling something or manipulating the reader, I explain to them that there are three main persuasive tactics that they are using. You might not realize it. One is the logical appeal. This is appealing to the reader's need for logic and patterns. This is really strong in humans. We automatically look for some kind of pattern. And if you establish a pattern, for example, in a heading, and maybe you're using words that end with ing, like examining, testing, elaborating, whatever, and then you violate that pattern and say evaluated, then you're violating that reader's expectation. It's a little thing, but it's part of this strong logical appeal. In fact, I've worked a lot with Shrikant in his proposals on headings and the way that they're phrased to reinforce whatever you want the reader to buy. The ethical appeal is also called a personal appeal, and this is an appeal to the reader's need to trust you. Share your values, feel that you're credible, believable. And so this mask that you're putting on, the persona, is something that has to fit in a particular intellectual community. So it's important to know the agency to which you are submitting. It's important to have a relationship with the program officer. This involves things like documentation that prove that you're trustworthy. If you lay out a very, objective lit review, you don't call anybody names, you don't use kind of that loaded diction, you're more credible than if you do that. If you are trotting out some preliminary data, that's the sort of thing that sets you up as being trustworthy, an authority, expertise of the team. All of that appeals to readers' need to trust you. So, you think of the difference between, let's see, using the My Pillow guy to talk about COVID versus Dr. Fauci. You have two different sorts of personas there that are each trying to convince you of something, and you're going to make judgments based on how they present themselves, what you know about their backgrounds, the types of language that they use. All of that forms their personal or their ethical appeal. And you do the same thing in words on the page. So pathos, it's a emotional appeal. On TV ads, let's think, say the injury lawyers come on and they are going to be very dramatic about how much money they got for their clients, and usually it's shouting. And that sort of thing is emoting, is way over the top. You don't want to do that in a proposal, but you do want to appeal to the reader's emotions. You create, at the very least, excitement about the solution to the problem, because you've got intellectuals on the line and they're excited by ideas. Possible transformation of a field, the gee whizzy aspects of what you're proposing, the uniqueness, are all important in hooking and keeping hooked that reader. So where these comment a proposal, there's some typical spots. Logical appeals are usually in the signage and headings and formatting, numbered lists, sentence structure, transitions, that sort of thing. If some reviewer says to you that they didn't follow your argument, that's usually a problem with the logical appeal. That you didn't make something clear. Ethical or personal appeals often happen in, are very strong in management sections. If you have to describe how you as the leader of a group, you know, are going to, why you have the credentials to lead a group. But without talking about yourself, they also show up in the methods. For example, if you're following something very carefully and you've got those preliminary data, that's also an ethical appeal. But these emotional appeals typically come in the places where you want a rather loftier tone, and it's usually at the beginning and the end of a proposal. And I have an example of something from Leor, I believe, in the next slide. Yes. So Leor is talking about making up a toolkit. Leor, I have edited these sentences just a teeny tiny bit to make it more succinct so it fits in one slide. He starts out as obvious emotional appeal. Black, Hispanic, and rural Americans are twice as likely to die from COVID-19. Okay, now he doesn't put die all in capital letters, but that's kind of how it hits the reader anyway. Like words like die are very effective in carrying automatic emotional appeal. But he goes on to say that these problems are not just in those populations, but in many other underserved communities and many other diseases besides COVID. So he opens up the scope to make this problem even bigger. Then he goes on to tell us that he's going to develop a toolkit, and finally, utilization of this toolkit can prevent thousands of future COVID-19 deaths, and ends this thing with saving lives. So this theme of saving lives through this toolkit that he's going to develop is carried out, I think, very effectively in this project summary. Leor, do you have any comments about how you structured this? What do you remember what went through your mind when you wrote it?
I wish I had some logical formula I followed, but the truth was there were so many revisions, and I think all were pretty decent, but you know, you're trying to fit the word limit and getting your points across. But I do think ultimately after many revisions, and I'm not talking about like resubmissions, just my own revisions as I'm writing. And the more you do it, the more you start thinking about, all right, I clearly have a ton of things I want to get in here. Nobody's been able to fit their aims page the first time they've ever wrote it. You know, you just got to write it. So just focusing on what are the main takeaways. And I think that kind of helped me pick up, you know, I'll just use the banana peel example again, or analogy again, just take out what didn't matter and really just focus on the big picture.
Yeah. Well, it worked for me. I thought that was a really good passage. So we need to move ahead now to my colleague Morgan, who's going to talk about academic versus grant writing.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Jane. So briefly, I'm just going to go over one of the things that may help in successfully writing a grant proposal is recognizing that writing for a grant proposal and writing for a research article or writing for academic purposes, those can be look very different, and they can be different skill sets. And the skills needed for academic writing don't always translate well to grant writing. I've got a table here with some examples on the differences that you'll see in academic writing versus grant writing. And some of this we've talked about previously. You know, grant writing is very sponsor centric. So it's about how does your work align with the funding agency. Academic writing is usually what has been done versus grant writing being future oriented, what work that you would like to do or work that should be done. And academic writing is very explanatory. This is sort of what we did and how we did it and what happened, versus sort of, as Jane was going through, a more persuasive rhetoric. This is where the field is at. This is what we want to do, and this is why we want to do it. So a little bit more into, and you know, these are not hard and fast rules. Sometimes you'll find things from one column in the other, but generally, grant writing has a very different, has a different scope to it than academic writing. So I'll just go a little bit more into a couple of these. So in terms of writing style, academic writing is often, it's very technical, lots of jargon, because you are writing to an audience of experts within the same field. They're peers, they're people who know sort of the state of the field and are more equipped to look at and assess the technical aspects, and are there for the research or the results of your work. Versus grant writing, you don't know who your reviewers are going to be, and more often they're more general, they have a more general expertise. So they may not necessarily be in your same field. So in that case, you need to use more accessible language. So cutting down on the jargon, being a bit more sort of plain and straight. This is what is happening, or this is the burden. This is what we're going to do about it, and making it more accessible to whoever maybe end up reading it. So in terms of voice, how you're writing it, academic writing a lot of the times is passive, because you're explaining what has been done already, and the subject is removed from the action. So for example, tissue was harvested and tested for inflammatory markers. This has already been done, and then I'll tell you what the results are. Grant writing uses a much more active voice, explaining what will be done, what you want to do, and emphasizing that you are the one, or your team are the ones to do it, and because you're the best poised to do it. So therefore, the subject will have a direct role in the action. We will harvest the tissue and test for inflammatory markers. And then finally, going back to sort of the rhetoric that Jane was talking about, academic writing is a lot more explanatory. It's explaining what's happened and how that fits into the field, versus grant writing is you're trying to sell the reader on what you want to do and why it's a good idea, why you're the best person or you're the best team to do that work, and why it needs to be funded. So those are just a few of the differences, and in keeping these in mind, you might find it a little easier to approach writing a grant versus and what the difference is from writing an academic style or a research article, paper, things like that. So I will pass it on to Sheila to go into some more tips.
All right, I'm going to make these really quick because I think a lot of these points have already been covered, and I really want y'all to have time to ask questions. So we've talked about, it's really about selling it. It's about the idea, but there's a lot of great ideas. It's really about how you take that idea and sell it to reviewers. So writing well, clearly, talking about the significance, the innovation of this idea, selling it, helping them to see whether it's through the emotional appeal or whatever, the other types that Jane talked about is critical. So how do you develop one of these ideas that is irresistible? Well, you have to identify a significant gap, a lack, a need in the field, and one that's relevant to the particular agency that you're planning to apply through. How many of you actually have Google Alerts set up for topics that you study? If not, you should, because you want to stay on top of what's cutting edge, what's coming out, because you want to be at the forefront of that, because no agency wants to fund stuff that's already been created or already done. So what you propose has to be a novel idea for a solution that can fill that gap, that lack, that need. Like I said, agencies don't want to fund duplicates. It has to be a major advancement, or at least a minor advancement, particularly for NIH. We know they like to do incremental advances. I encourage you, if you're thinking about NIH funding, to think about, to look at their NIH Matchmaker. It's a great resource. You can actually go in there and put like your specific aims or your overview, and it'll tell you projects that have been funded that have been similar to that, and it'll tell you what agencies or what divisions within NIH have actually funded it. So think about those priorities, see what the different groups are funding. You can do this with NSF and other agencies too. It's a different mechanism there though. Share your aims, your objectives, your overview with people who are skilled. Srikanth will tell you that I call on him periodically to say, here, can you take a look at this, or can you talk to X, and give them advice about how to write a big center type proposal, for example. And when you get their advice, you need to take that feedback, because none of us like giving advice, taking the time to review your materials, and then we look at a draft later and like none of our feedback or little of our feedback is there. So recognize the importance of that peer review and take advantage of it. And once you have a good draft, get feedback from program officers. I'm in the process of creating just a short spew that I can send to NSF about a rapid proposal I want to submit. And I'm hoping they'll bite, but I have to get their approval before I can even submit it. So if they're not interested, if they're not going to buy it, then you're wasting your time developing that full proposal. So, as we've talked about with some of the prior presenters, that elevator pitch, think about 2 to 3 sentences in that first paragraph that can really stress why it's important, what's about, why it's worthy of all this money that you're asking for. If you don't get it in that first page, you're unlikely to get funded. And so, I tend to go for emotional appeals. I know Jane uses a variety of different ones and others do too, but like Leor and like Rachel tend to do, how many people are going to die, or how many people currently die each year from X? Without this innovative thing that we're going to do, more people are even going to die going forward. So think about the criticalness of what it is that you want to do and appeal to reviewers in terms of helping them to understand why it's critical and why it's critical now. And then, as Jane has said and others have said, repeat it, selling those points all the way through. That consistency, hitting people over the head with it over and over again is going to help them to see the importance of it. So I wanted to show you a couple of quick examples here. I'm going to actually put all this up at one time. Make sure. Okay, so this first one here, effects of a new fertilizer on plant growth. It's a continuation of our previous study in which we found it had a negligible effect. So we want to do more research to see if there's anything out there. Well, come on, would you fund this? It doesn't really talk about the significance, the potential impact, doesn't give you a context, there's no novelty, no innovation, et cetera, all those things that we have talked about today during this workshop. So it doesn't sell the project. So here is another one on that same draft. And it says, we want to revolutionize sustainable agriculture by doing X. We're building on prior research. It had demonstrated promising, but not yet fully understood results. So we want to do more to unlock that full potential, et cetera. So here you get more about the significance, the potential impact of the research. It highlights novel and innovative aspects of it, gives you more of a context, and it talks about some of the real world applications. It's going to increase crop yields, improve food security, reduce the environmental impact, has clear research objective. It sells it better than the prior version. Now I'm going to tell y'all something. So you've probably all heard of ChatGPT. I actually had it create these. I said, give me an intro paragraph to a grant proposal. That was the first one that came. And then I said, okay, get more specific on this grant proposal. And look what it kicked out. We're going to have more conversations about ChatGPT moving forward. But, sometimes it may help you to overcome writer's block, to think about examples and how to make them better. I'm not saying that's good, that's bad. But if you put in your own text, it may be able to help you in some way or another. Lots of conversations going on around about ChatGPT. We'll talk about those more later. So no magic bullet. It takes practice, lots of editing to sell your science. So with that, I want to stop because I really want folks to have time to ask questions. And I'm sure you have lots of great experience that you may want to share too. So feel free to either put it in the chat or to just unmute yourself and ask questions of us or any of the panelists.
I actually have a question. I really liked one of the points that were made, Jane. I believe you made it about, you know, the need to ask yourself, all right, how is this proposal going to benefit you, your team? And then you had the taxpayer on there. And that's something that, you know, I like to think about, because when you're asking NIH or NSF for $1 million of taxpayer money, you want to be doing something with that. And I've wondered, is there anything on, you know, providing some sort of cost analysis? You know, I never really see it in proposals, like a cost benefit analysis. And I know that that's a lot of work, but even just some broad cost benefit analysis as a tool to help sell your proposal. Have you all seen that before?
I probably can. So you're talking about general cost analysis for your research?
More of a, you know, if you're asking, you know, for example, I'm making the claim that my toolkit can, if used, can save tens of thousands of lives and, you know, reduce the strain on the healthcare system, right? So I'm asking for $2.5 million, but if it prevents 100,000 hospitalizations, I mean, even like a back of the envelope calculation at least shows it's worth it. I'm just curious if anyone's ever used just a simple version of that before in their proposal to help make their argument.
Yeah, I mean, not in that particular context. We have done some cost analysis, but typically in many other Department of Energy projects, they mandate, they request and in some instances mandate techno-economic analysis, where you have a technology and you also have the economics, and you need to basically couple the two and provide an analysis. Let's say you are saying that you will reduce by the carbon footprint by 50%, and you will save the cost by some X amount of dollars. How are you going to do it, right? And all the calculations leading that to it, how the approach and all those things. That is something I have seen, but your point exactly, at least in my experience, I haven't done it, and I haven't seen it also as a reviewer.
Yeah, Jean's got her hand up.
Hello, I just wanted to share that the Institute of Education Sciences about 4 or 5 years ago started requiring for several of its grant proposals a cost analysis plan. Since many education research projects include an intervention of some kind, the scaling of the intervention, the IES wanted to have some information about, well, if we actually asked people to do this, how much would it cost them to do as part of like a policy evaluation? And so there's a number of resources out there through IES that talk about how you do a cost analysis plan, what the elements are, that sort of thing. So I thought I'd just pass that along.
Yeah, thanks, Jean.
Leor, the only way that I've done something similar to what you're talking about is like with some of my research that looks at depression outcomes. For example, you know, I've put in statements about what the cost of depression is for work for organizations or for companies. For example, if I'm looking at people in the workforce, and so, you know, thinking about how many people have it and what that actually cost to employers, for example, but I haven't done a formal economic analysis. I have seen that in some NSF proposals, though, in the past, but it's typically when they're investigating some economic aspect of an issue.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Well, you know, up at the agencies, that's what they're doing when they're when they're deciding whether or not they're going to give you the money. But, you know, to be a fly on the wall in those meetings.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is because sometimes, writing that impact statement or the benefit can be difficult to verbalize.
Yep.
So having something like that, I mean, that's great. I didn't realize that how explicit those conversations were in the background, but it would be nice to be able to include that in a proposal where the argument may just be a little bit too difficult to make. So I was just curious about how common that was, but I think this is all very helpful, and it's good to know as a taxpayer. I feel good that someone's doing that calculation in the background.
Yeah, oftentimes when I'm looking at proposals, I'll see a big disjunct between what is argued in the project narrative and what comes in that NSF broader impact section. It's like all of a sudden they went and elevated it about 30,000 feet, and it feels like it's not warranted. It's not earned yet. So I think that's one of the things that I try to work with faculty a lot on is to make sure that whatever they say in that project description is going to convince the reviewers that the cost, the benefit is indeed there, and then it's worth paying the money for it.
I have a question. So, I mean, I know I take advantage of the service, but I just wanted to tell to the broader one. So, in addition to this editing and other services, what other graphic kind of service that you provide, or and also do you have a lead time in this editing request?
So the more lead time, the better, because, we are, the Office of Research Development is a small group. In terms of graphic support, right now it's our communications director, Scott, who has worked with you some. Shrikant is our main graphics person at this point that can help, as time permits. So I always encourage y'all, if you need assistance from ORD, please, fill out our form that we have as soon as you can, so that we can make sure that there's time to assist, going forward.
Thank you. Well, I can ask another question. No one is asking. So you, in one of your services, you said you in the R initiatives, you can actually apply for requesting external reviews, right? So does the proposal have to have a specific funding amount for me to request that kind of service? Or a 100K proposal can also be applied, or $1 million?
Yes, there's no limits in terms of the amount for the proposal, but there are guidelines on our website for requesting it in terms of the time length. And so that's one of the challenges. You can't send it out for an external review like 2 weeks before it's due. You have to give reviewers time to do it and then get the reviews back, and then for you to actually be able to incorporate those suggestions that they've given you. So look on the ORD website and you'll see under the R's, the external reviewer program.
You.
All right. Let me just share my screen one last time, because I do want to just remind folks of the upcoming workshop that we have. All right, so the end of the month, if you've ever thought about working with industry or IP issues, we've got somebody from CURF and then somebody from the Division of Research who will be leading that workshop on the 30th. Please make sure that you register. You can find all of these on our website. We've got a Boosting Broader Impacts coming up towards the end of February. That should be really good, particularly if you're thinking about NSF proposals. Broader Impacts is really critical. And then for those folks who are thinking that they might be ready to kind of go from smaller teams or individual proposals up to more like Shrikant with some of these center proposals that he does, we've got a week-long training in May that you do have to be recommended by your chair and your associate dean for research to participate in that. It's maxed at 20 on that. So it's going to be a great program, but lots of work too. So please reach out if you please sign up for these, and Please, if you have any questions or anything, always reach out to us. We're happy to help. We're happy to connect you with other folks. And let's all thank our panelists today, because great experience from a range of different disciplines, and really just great colleagues too, great faculty. So feel very fortunate that we were able to have them today. And thank you all again, all of y'all, for coming. We appreciate you showing up and asking questions and participating today. Hope to see you again in the end of the month.